While I am not particularly mathematically gifted, I do have an understanding of basically the nature of numbers and equations. They're simply a more precise way to describe something that gives you enough information that you can practically apply it to a situation. For instance, I've always been blown away by the Voyager traverse that launched from the Earth, went by Jupiter, used a gravitational deflection from Jupiter to go to Saturn, used gravitational deflection from Saturn to go to Uranus, and used gravitational deflection from Uranus to go to Neptune. Now, the original math of the trajectory was not perfect, but there was enough fuel aboard the craft itself that eventually it could pass by all 4 of those planets based on an accurate enough mathematics that we knew where each planet would be, we knew what their gravitational tug would be, we knew which side of each planet to pass by so we could get a little rotational boost in the speed of the Voyagers, and we also knew how much thrust to apply to the booster stages, the intermediate stages, and course correction thrust along the way to ensure that Voyager, I believe it was Voyager 2, would actually take advantage of gravitational assist to go and visit all 4 of those planets before eventually leaving our solar system altogether. So mathematics is an incredibly powerful tool, but it is precisely that. It is a tool and it is a description. It is not necessarily part of the fabric of the cosmos. I do not necessarily believe that some divine mathematician sat down and figured out with using equations of a holographic nature to describe the entire universe. Do not think that was necessary. I think it was only necessary to imbue it with a certain number of properties that once these properties and behaviors were well written into the fabric of the cosmos, that the universe could evolve in the way that it has. And of course, the evolution of the universe, as I understand it, as I'm proposing here, which is basically a hypothesis based on what little I know about things cosmological, astronomical, and physical, could in fact be the basis for all the material realities we see around us within the context of a greater theory called stressor theory. But right now we're going to focus on a thing called spatio-A-temporal moments and the mathematics thereof. Those who have followed the STM series recognize this as being a flower, or what artificial intelligence is called, an ensemble of spatio-temporal moments. This ensemble, or flower, consists of any one of these, could be a central STM moment. However, we're illustrating it used here. And all these STMs interact in a way that allows energy to either A, propagate as photons, or B, entangle the moments themselves into subatomic particles that may, if they properly entangle, have some degree of sustainability and durability to them so that they will not break down, especially if they continue to be stimulated by additional energies and influences. So here we have the 33 spheres of influence associated with a single efflorescence of a spatio-atemporal moment, because there is no oscillations going through this, and until they begin to oscillate like tiny bubbles bouncing off one another and repositioning, and over time they remain spatio-atemporal moments. Once the energy is absorbed and re-emitted according to stressor theory concepts, they become spatio-temporal moments. The whole point here, though, is we want to move forward to at least some basic mathematics that can describe the relationships between these various spatial-atemporal moments, or STMs. What I've done here is created a little chart of a spatio-atemporal moment nucleation matrix. 1. Every core nuclei of a STM are equidistant from all others. So, basically, there's something holding them together in a matrix. And that thing that's holding them together in a matrix keeps them all spatially cloned, in a sense. Each nuclei is located the same distance from every other nuclei. And what that does is it basically says that each spatio-atemporal moment has a nuclei in a sphere of normal influence. That sphere of nominal influence can either totally, partially interpenetrate another STM so that its sphere of influence just touches another STM's nuclei. It can also partially interpenetrate so that its sphere penetrates within a certain distance of another moment's sphere of influence, or a third relationship, and the most distant in terms of contact potential, is between the sphere of influence of one spatio-atemporal moment and another. So all these relationships are set up in such a way that a dynamic equilibrium becomes possible. And the dynamism of that equilibrium occurs when an oscillation is set up across the matrix, either in one direction or in 3 dimensions. Remember, this, when looked at this way, is the vertical aspect of the same efflorescence, which looks like this. All right, so you either have a central SAM, you have one that interpenetrates to the core, close neighbor, you have a more distant neighbor that penetrates within the SAM sphere of influence, or you have another one that's just tangential. Now, what is it that maintains these? Well, we'll develop that a little bit further. So each spatio-atemporal moment has a core nuclei which all have the same universal value of separation from one another, a matrix. Each nuclei is separate in 3 dimensions, so that would be length, width, and depth. Each nuclei, and at the same value, universal value. Each nuclei both attracts and repels all the others. So basically, the sphere of influence I've marked up here is not quite described as arbitrary, but this actually sphere of influence can go off indefinitely into space. However, for the purposes of understanding SAMs and STMs, we're going to arbitrarily define a sphere of influence here that is defined by the relationships between the nuclei. So, I've already mentioned this. Each nuclei has a nominal sphere of influence. Okay, now we go on to number 5 point. Each sphere of influence is maintained by the interplay of attraction and repulsion. So we're saying here there's only really 2 fundamental forces at work in the universe. One force is drawing, let's say we'll call this one drawing the 2 nuclei together, and the other force is pushing them apart, so that at some point these 2 forces here are in perfect equilibrium. The attractive force, which we will call this, and the repulsive force, which we will call that, or vice versa, are mathematically equivalent. Okay. Attraction and repulsion balances out perfectly at a distance value of 0.5. 0.5. Whatever 0.5 is, this mathematics says the attraction and the repulsion are exactly equal in a spatio-atemporal moment at a distance value, numeric, of 0.5. The attracto-repulsive force between SAM nuclei maintains the uniformity of the SAM matrix. Since all of the SAMs are equidistant from one another in terms of their neighboring propinquities, in other words, 0.5 units, what you end up with is a perfectly stable matrix that extends infinitely through space. However, ones that are closer to one another have a stronger attracto-repulsive influence on each other, which causes them to ultimately propagate energy through the matrix in the form of what we call a photon. Okay. The attracto influence is based on the equation of 1 divided by d squared. This is a circular relationship, circular mathematics. In other words, it's on a plane, it's flat. And if you take the value 0.5 and you multiply 0.5 by itself, you get 0.25. Then if you divide that into 1, you get a value of 4. We will see this later on in a slide chart. The repulso influence is governed by the equation 1 over 2d cubed. In other words, if we go back to this value of 0.5 we used here in d, if you take 0.5 and you cube it, right? 0.5 becomes some 0.5, I think it becomes 0.125, and you double it, then you get a value of, once again, the same value as d squared, which then becomes 0.25, and if you divide that into 1, it becomes 4. So the attractive influence is 0.5, and the repulsive influence is 0.5 at a distance of 1/2 a unit. The two equations are therefore equal in potency where distance equals 0.5. We've already explained that. The equality of potency becomes disturbed by energy. In other words, this is a SAM. It is stable. These forces are at work, attracting and repelling each other, maintaining a distance of 0.5 in all the matrical relationships. But what happens if something disturbs, just basically comes in like a wave and disturbs these? They're going to act more like bubbles. So they're going to compress and decompress, compress and decompress. And that compression and decompression is going to propagate by stressor theory throughout the entire matrix. And the result will be, we'll see something that looks like a sine wave. Energy passing through a matrix horizontally causes compression and decompression, as explained. Compresso-decompression causes an oscillation. So not only does it compress and decompress, but it oscillates until it returns to stability once again. Over a domain of STMs, such oscillations result in a wave. So it's just like the surface of water. You're going to get a wave effect, which is basis of what they used to call the ether concept of light. But now, instead of it being something that is, let's call it transcendental, it's actually endemic to the fabric of space. And the key is, the reason why the Michelson-Morley experiment didn't detect an ether is because these matrices are all bound together gravitationally. So around a massive object, what happens is they are automatically being compressed by the gravitational attraction of a bunch of entangled matter off in the distance, which results in Einstein's concept of the curvature of space. Okay, over a domain of STM, such oscillations result in a wave. A surplus of oscillation results in entanglement. Now, we'll explore that a little bit more. Okay, so if you hit these bubbles, these spheres of influence with their nuclei and their forces with so much force, you can actually cause them to combine together into a particle. And if you hit it with the right amount of force, at the right frequency, in the right direction, whatever it is, that can form a neutron. And I've already explained in a previous video that if you create a neutron out of an up and a down quark and all the other quarks that the standard model comes up with to explain subatomic particles, once it's free in space, it'll be subjected to other energies which will cause it to break down within 10 to 15 minutes into a proton and electron. And if that proton and electron are close enough together, which they might very well be, they will create a hydrogen atom. Meanwhile, an antineutrino will be spun off, because an antineutrino is considered something that will conserve some kind of angular momentum on the part of the particle. So a surplus of oscillation results in entanglement. Now, I suspect that the surplus of oscillation we're talking about here was something that happened cosmologically in the distance from a transcendental source of energy, but it's entirely possible the same thing is going on inside the nuclei of stars or near the cores of stars, resulting in nucleosynthesis and the release of light. But new particles are created. Entanglements can be temporary or permanent. Okay, so most entanglements that are going to occur are just going to create these unsustainable nuclear particles of weird kinds that they've discovered all over the place. When they go and smash atoms and everything else, they don't last very long. They leave trails inside cloud chambers, etc., etc. Hundreds of particles which have very short temporary lives of particleization. However, I've already explained permanent particles may derive from the neutron. Permanent STM entanglement results in atoms. Okay, so now you got a hydrogen, you got a neutron that breaks into a hydrogen, nuclei, a proton, and electron, and all the atoms eventually dissipate back to STMs. This is something that has to be proven. There's a half-life to many known particles, but I suspect that once all stimulation no longer occurs in the cosmos, things will start breaking down again. All right, so finally, the universe as we know it is being sustained by energy flux, both horizontally and vertically. And I'm about to run out of camera here. The last thing, STM forces, here's the equations. If you sit down with the numbers and you use the distances, you will discover that at a distance of 0.5, you will have a force of attraction of 4 and a repulsion of 4, and you will have a beautiful spatio-atemporal moment bubble. Thanks for listening.